Hello, my friends. What's up? Michael here. I'm just recording a very quick message to let you know that I'm taking a brief hiatus from the podcast. I'm just taking a quick break for the rest of summer because I'm going to focus on reopening Mark Fisher Fitness. We reopened in New York City, and I want to focus on that for the next few months. So I'm going to practice what I preach and put this project on the back burner just briefly. And while I'm taking a break from the podcast, it's going to continue. So Mark Fisher and Pete Dupuis and friends that they invite are going to continue having conversations on the podcast for the next several episodes until I'm back at the end of summer. So enjoy the episodes while I'm gone. I hope you don't miss me too much. I know I'll miss you, but enjoy these episodes and have a great summer. Bye.
All right, friends. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Biz for Unicorns podcast. Today, I hope you'll find is a particularly fun and saucy format. My dear friend Pete has asked his Instagram followers to provide some questions. I did the same. So we are going to do a grab bag. And the way this podcast is going to work is we are going to answer the questions and challenge ourselves ask the questions and then challenge ourselves to answer in a rapid fire format to give you as much information, as much direction, and as much value as we can in what will be a concise episode. Pete, are you ready?
I'm ready. I realized we talked about how we want to attack this up to the point where we didn't discuss who was going to open. So I apologize for that dead air for a moment when we hit the record.
That's great.
But you're a leader, so do this.
Listen, leaders go first. All right. So the first question is working with skills coaches. Pete, can you tell us about working with skills coaches?
Yes. So again, we're going to bounce a little bit between questions and topics. This one falls under the category of topic. My expectation for skills coaches, as far as terminology goes, would be like in our business, pitching instructors. That might be a hitting instructor for the baseball community. In certain cases, I guess that could be even so far as like my business partner's wife coming in and doing vision testing sort of deal, because the hand-eye coordination stuff is pretty big. But what I would say is this is a must for making your business more sticky if you want to be in the performance space, or I see it as a must, because you want to create a dynamic where you have a little bit of a one-stop shop, because parents get real sick of playing school bus. And we have brought pitching instruction in-house. We've brought catching instruction in-house. We have a number of skill coaches that come and go either in a full-time or part-time format. I know people's question there is going to be, should they be an employee or should they be 1099? The answer would be yes or yes. It kind of depends on, honestly, I usually fall back on, what does your accountant say? Your accountant knows your operation best. They have a good feel for your finances. What's the best course of action there? We have done and continue to do both. So that's a matter of your specific operation. Next question.
Great.
That work for you?
Yes, that's perfect.
All right. I'll read the next one here, and you can hit it first. Onboarding new trainers, setting expectations, and developing/managing staff. Is that a quick answer for you?
Amazing. Yes, this is a fantastic topic. And Pete and I want to acknowledge we realized that we asked for topics and not for questions. And this is a topic. Unfortunately, because it's so broad, very hard to know exactly where to start. But I would say this, I know we have an onboarding question coming up that I'll give some quick thoughts on. But I think this particular topic, rather than try to give you random things, I'll point you in direction of, I think, some resources that are valuable. One of them, not to plug ourselves here, but the Biz for Unicorns course, Care and Feeding of Superheroes, which is currently an exclusive course for members of the Unicorn Society. We do plan to ultimately release our virtual learning platform to the world at large, but that course truly covers all of these topics. And I would also encourage you to go to the Biz for Unicorns blog. There's actually a ton of articles and broken down, in fact, by quite literally each of those topics. And I think you'll find hopefully some useful perspective at those sites. Any non-Biz for Unicorns resources, Pete?
Not off the top of my head, right? Well, my website, petedupuis.com. I've blogged about a lot of this stuff. But I was just going to say, this question was submitted by Nick Griffith. And Nick, I think buried in the middle of it is kind of an answer to what you said, which is specifically you put the term setting expectations. And everything we talk about today is going to surround just good expectation management. So be it onboarding new trainers, developing and managing staff, all these things, it's just about being transparent with your expectations and then going from there. I'd say that's reinforced in the blog post you've mentioned, but that's my 2 cents here.
Yeah, and I'll offer one more quick resource that doesn't sound maybe so self-serving. And I swear I'm not a shill for them, but Zingerman's Deli in Ann Arbor, Michigan is, to my mind, some of the best continuing education resources out there. We, in fact, brought them in during the most recent Unicorn Society retreat to do their standard operating procedures workshop. So that particular one might be a valuable one to check out. They have a great system for creating simple standard operating procedures, which will, I think, allow for a lot more clarity in your business. So you're very explicit with your team on how you want things to go. All right.
Perfect.
We will jam on. Pete, your question, your next one is ideal return on investment on trainers in casual / part / full-time roles.
This one's a little bit of a tough one for me because my trainers are not assigned to specific clients, and it's very hard to identify revenue generation on a staff member by staff member basis, or I should say our net profit. So I think it's best if I punt this one to you, since you guys do more personal training than we do. And I think you're a little bit more deliberate in managing these specific numbers.
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't actually do a ton of personal training. We do just a teeny little bit, and it's not our main business model. So I don't know if this is actually what the question is, but what I'm interpreting this question to mean is essentially, if you're asking what the ROI is on your trainers, what you're really asking is what percentage of your expenses should be, or your revenue rather, should go to pay out the trainers, right? So if I were to be very specific, the ROI, this is going to give you a very specific number, should be 5x return.
Perfect.
It should be 5x return, because specifically, if you look at your revenue, ideally cost of goods sold for the training team is ideally in the 20%-ish ballpark of total revenue for the business on a monthly and yearly basis. I would encourage that to include payroll, taxes, benefits, et cetera. Now, overall, when you're looking at compensation for a team in a typical training gym, most industry standards say it should totally, including your administrative staff, but excluding owner pay. So excluding owner pay, your non-owner people cost for payroll employees, inclusive of payroll taxes, should be around 30-ish%. There are people that say it can go down to 25%. I think that's frankly going to be hard to pull off in most markets, but if you can do it, God love you. I think I can go up to 40% or even 45%. That's getting on the high side, and some people say that's too high. My personal strong opinion is that it's much better to invest in human beings than virtually anything else, because you're paying for soul forces. So working backwards, if 20% of 20% of revenue is the direct quote unquote cost of goods sold, which in a service business is the direct cost of facilitating sessions, I would say it's a 5x ROI. So that's a very specific answer.
Wasn't that wonderful where you led with, well, I don't really have an answer for you, but here are 14 statistics.
Now let me talk nonstop for 7 minutes. All right, next one is...
You gave the exact answer I was hoping you would give. You were extraordinarily specific while promising not to be.
Well, thank you. Pete, so this question for you, interestingly enough, is almost identical to the previous one I gave you. Staff, finding the right people, onboarding, ongoing training, management, et cetera. So I guess we can skip that one for this hot side.
I want to just touch on the finding the right people. That one's tough. And in my business, we built an internship program that helps facilitate the identification of good people. You introduced me to the concept of your bench, aka kind of like potential coaches in waiting. Could you give 30 to 60 seconds on the bench, since I find myself explaining your version of that very often?
Yeah, essentially, like any marketing funnel, and it's strange, I know, to think of teammates as prospects, but there is a similar, I think, level of tenacity and discipline required in having a living document and or spreadsheet where you're cultivating relationships with individuals that might be a fit for the business at some point, particularly for the typical training gym. If you do not have the ability to do an extensive internship, which is hands down the best thing to do, at the very least, what you want to do is get people that could be trainers for your facility training with you. One thing I'll give a shout out to my friend JC at the IFBA, who I think is brilliant because they separately came up with the exact same thing we do at MFF independently, which of course means he's brilliant, which is now when we have somebody we want to join our team, we ask them to start with a trial, and then we will ask them to train with us for as long as 12 weeks. MFF will pay for it, of course, but we want them to do it. That is a long road, but outside of having some sort of internship, this is a very effective way to really get to know individuals, to understand how they show up in the world, to see if they're coachable. And of course, it makes your onboarding infinitely easier because they have a real sense of what's going on in your business because they've experienced it for several weeks or in some cases, several months as a client.
That is wonderful. All right, let's move on. We've got one that falls absolutely under the category of topic and not question, KPI. I am going to just point our audience to a specific blog post that you wrote, because I kick this one out often, and it's just called Know Your Numbers, a non-intimidating overview of key performance indicators. If you search the term business for unicorns and know your numbers in the Google machine, you're going to find yourself with that very quickly. I think that's the fastest path to answering that question. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree. Let's move on. So this next one, incidentally, we're also going to take a quick pass on because this is a particularly awesome question and it was sent in the DMs, and I think we're going to hold on for it till the end. We are going to film 2 podcasts for you because we love you so much. So this might come at the end of the second one. Next.
Knowing when to leave your gym and start your own would likely start with 0 clients. I'll hit this quickly. If there are any lessons I've learned coming out of the pandemic, it's that bad stuff can happen, and it's nice to have a decent slush fund to help you keep your head above water. If you don't have that slush fund and you have 0 clients, I would be somewhat reluctant to jump. It kind of depends on how comfortable you are from a financial situation, in my mind, because starting from 0 and going to something it's exhausting. It's time consuming. It's something that will cost you sleep. And it's not that I'm saying you shouldn't do it, but you need a safety net, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that the challenge with this is that the context of your personal situation really does matter, because frankly, the answer is probably different if you have no cost of living and you're 26, if you're 33 and have a family of 3 kids. So that certainly is a consideration. I think another thing that will be important, there's not a hard way to assess, oh, you're ready for it, is understand the basics of sales and marketing. Because if you don't know how to do that, particularly starting from 0, that could get you in a tough situation where you open up, hang up your shingles, and then hope that you've built that they will come, which usually isn't the way this works out. And the final quickie thought I will leave is, for better or for worse, one is never ready. So this is a very important question because it is possible to be not ready in the sense of this is a bad idea that's going to destroy your financial livelihood. It'd be a horrible, horrible mistake. But ultimately, even when you're ready, you're never quote unquote ready. My understanding is it's similar in that sense to parenthood, but I'll defer to Pete on that.
Yeah, the later you get into life, the more variables there are that are, I don't want to say out of your control, but they changed the game here. It was a lot easier for me to start a business at 25 when I didn't have a mortgage, a wife, kids, other people who counted on me to consistently bring home a paycheck. So we were blissfully naive about the risk associated, and the only person who could really get hurt was me. And so if you find yourself in that space as you ask this question, maybe the answer is, hey, let it rip. Have some fun.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, let's jump into the next one. I know you're going to have a beefy answer. It's going to be fun to watch you try and do this in a tight window of time. Earning investment. What do you do with your earnings? Do you invest in the stock market?
Yes, I do. I do invest in the stock market. What do I do with my earnings? Without boring you with the details, I am a fan of what's often called index investing. I'm a long-term buy and hold investor. So I have a very, very simple approach to my personal investments. And it is mostly putting money in index funds to track the stock market. I have a little bit in bonds. And at this point, I keep a certain percentage of my portfolio invested as a limited partner in real estate investments. So these are larger commercial multi-unit residential buildings. I tend to look for opportunities in the Midwest, and I have some specific parameters for internal rate of return I'm looking for those deals. But the real estate frankly is still a relatively small percentage of my portfolio, but that is essentially how I do it. So for most people listening, for the most part, your best bet is probably just to buy index funds that track the stock market. And I'll give you one recommendation. I'm reading a book right now that is, I think, not at all new for me. So for me, it's a little bit boring, but I think it's going to be perfect for anybody overwhelmed and not sure how to begin investment. It's called The Simple Path to Wealth. And I will be writing a Business Unicorns email that frankly will probably come out before this podcast does, where I'm going to share some of my favorite finance books, both for personal finance and for understanding business finance as a training gym owner.
Sure. So for me, it's not quite so detailed. When we started having kids, we realized, hey, it would be a good idea to take out some life insurance. That was also when we started working with an advisor who basically pushed us in that direction and also started helping us save a lot more strategically toward retirement. So I've got an advisor who understands kind of my desired risk profile, and mine and my wife's. And we have quarterly phone calls and an annual in person where we revisit where we're at and we adjust based on what's happening. I choose not to be quite so informed on it as you are, not because I like to be in the dark, just because I kind of have to handpick my areas of interest and information consumption to make sure that I'm doing a good job for my employees, my community, so on. And so I'm not anywhere near as well read on you, which is why I do pay an advisor to manage this for me and kick advice and direction my way. But the answer, yes, we're in the stock market.
Yes. Yeah. And if I would give one thought to this that Pete may disagree on and listeners may disagree on, but my general rule of thumb is until you have $1 million in assets, for the most part, if you're under the age of 40 with less than $1 million in assets, if you want to make your life simple, probably just buy a total stock market index fund. Just go to Vanguard, keep your expense fees low, let it ride. I think I do want to highlight, Pete made a good point that we don't have time to go into in this quickie podcast, but you also need to protect yourself and your wealth. That's why insurances matter. So that is certainly, particularly once there's children in the picture, you're going to want to get squared away. But for most of you, until you're at $1 million mark or over 40 years old, probably just putting it all in a stock market index fund with a low fee is probably the best way to let it ride.
I will not disagree with that.
And then once I will say briefly, this is a sliver of our listeners. I think once you're somewhere between $2 to $10 million in investable assets, at a certain point, I think you probably do need a wealth manager, because what will happen is your tax situation starts to get infinitely more complicated and it becomes difficult. You need somebody essentially to referee between your insurance providers and your financial people and your tax planners, because all those pieces start to get complicated and need to knit together. And particularly if and when you're looking at estate planning, which generally, again, is not going to happen really for most people till they're certainly into their late 40s, and necessarily if they have kids, at that point, you're going to need more help. Done. Great.
So in looking at the next question, there is obviously a trend here. People like talking about onboarding systems. So I would like to propose that we actually gather our thoughts. Maybe you, me, Michael, Ben, the crew. We really get our thoughts in place on what the broad, somewhat generalized answer is to new trainer onboarding systems. And we put out some content on this front. We've touched it 3 or 4 times already in what is 17 minutes. So I say we push to the next one and promise information on this topic later. We just got to gather our thoughts. Agree or disagree?
Yes. Agree. I like that.
Perfect.
Next one, coming to you, Pete. Why sports performance micros are a great option for Gen Pop? I'm not sure I know what sports performance micros are, but I'm hoping you can help.
I'm going to presume this means performance-based micro gyms. And my answer to you would be that it's really just marketing when we slap this performance gym title on top of it. Because when you actually look at the foundational things that we're doing in my performance gym and you were doing in your next to Broadway Gen Pop micro gym, we're doing all the same shit. So I think that maybe my answer here would be that we don't train, or we don't make our clients who are, say, in their 50s or 60s feel like we gave them the 50 or 60-year-old person version of our training services while the pro athletes are over here. Every single person who comes to the door is an individual, unique circumstance. We evaluate them all with the same degree of intricacy or attention to detail. And then we provide the program that is in their best interest. And so I never say kick them over there. They're the Gen Pop people, give them the Gen Pop assessment. Every one of them is individualized here. So I think that maybe you could say training people like athletes, whether they self-identify as an athlete or not, is a pretty good thing, or it's worked for us up to this point in time. And I'd leave it there.
Great. Next question.
You tell me which question slide you have found yourself on.
Let's go with brand development, connecting with opinion leaders.
Cool. I think we touched on this one a little bit in the interview that Eric and I did with you a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Where we talked about how we got in front of opinion leaders. I would say that it's usually easier to identify the opinion leaders in your space than you might realize. If I said to you, who is kind of the loudest, bordering on obnoxious, but fun personality in your weight room from your clientele, who's the person that you can't keep on track when you're like, hey, we got to keep moving, rest intervals matter, you can't talk for the next 20 minutes. I think every gym's got a small handful of them. Those tend to be the same people outside of the gym that they are inside of it. And the loud people are the ones who scale our message most effectively. So I don't get frustrated by those people. I embrace them. I just kind of educate them on how to preach our services when they're not here. Because there's a lot of value in teaching your people, your clients, how to teach their friends what you do. You got to teach them how to talk the talk, the lingo. And we make a big push toward making sure that the loudest people in the room are typically well equipped to be loud about our services if given the opportunity to do so. And they tend to be the opinion leaders we need.
No further comment.
Got it. All right, I'll read the next one for you. Long-term staff retention. Have 3 gyms, adding another next year. Staff retention key. We'll say is
Great.
Key.
Yes, I'm going to give you as concise an answer as I can. I am a believer that for when you're talking about trainers and to some extent probably any front desk-ish style team member, if the person is very ambitious, you're usually going to want them to be around for about 2 to 3 to maybe 5 years. There will be some outliers that can be around for the long term, but if the individual is just and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, quote unquote, rank and file trainer, if you are planning to have a gym that is around for a long, long time, I think it's important to be very upfront with the individuals what expectations are as far as what pay increases will be like. And at a place like MFF, we're very upfront. We bring them in. We anticipate you'll be here for 2 to 3 solid years. And at that point, it'll be time for you to go elsewhere. It's not compulsory. We don't boot you out the door 3 years, but it's a special type of individual that is happy to do the same job semi-indefinitely. So interestingly enough, my counterintuitive answer is when you're looking particularly at trainers, you're probably not going to want massive retention forever. And if people stick around for too long, that can be a whole separate issue. Having said that, since you have 3 gyms and are adding a 4th, my assumption is you have something like a leadership team. And that becomes a different situation because if you have people in a leadership team and you're able to really increase the opportunity for their professional growth, if you're able to give them meaningful increases for financial compensation, ideally with bonuses that track with specific performance metrics, that becomes a different world. And in that situation, a facility like yours, depending on how big they are, and I'm not sure how big your facilities are, what the total size of your business is, but it is ideal if you want some stability in your life as a training gym owner at that scale to start develop, even if it's a small handful, but a few people that will be your consigliaries that you incentivize financially, emotionally, professionally, spiritually to hang with you. Because what you don't want to do for that scale of business, particularly create a business where it's really reliant upon you at all times through your own grit and will and systems to continue to grow the business, to keep the wheels on, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned your 2 to 3 window because I don't know that we have necessarily discussed this in all that much detail, you and I. But we ask that our entry-level coaches sign a 2-year contract. Our director roles are 3-year contracts. And from almost the moment they start collecting a paycheck from us, I ask them to entertain an idea where I work with them in a mentor-mentee relationship where we talk about how I can accelerate the pace with which they outgrow the role. And I do that partially because I want to see them be exceptional while they're in our gym, but also because I find that when they realize I'm serious, that the objective is for them to be too good for me to retain potentially, just because that, I can't make 10 director roles. I find that loyalty kicks up pretty dramatically, where they're like, wow, this person actually is looking out for me, and they don't see me as a piece of property that they own until they decide to kick me out of here and bring in the new fresh trainer. So it's created a really healthy dynamic for us. It's been in place since around 2017, 2018. And more often than not, at the end of a 2-year contract, a great coach will come to me if I don't have a director role to bump them up into. They'll say, I feel like I haven't quite extracted all the value I can around here. Would you entertain the idea of a 3rd year? Which I just love, because the answer to that would never be no. And there's no onboarding, but it also puts us in a little bit better position where it's not like a hostile negotiation. It's them saying, what if we just put a pin in this and I stick around for a little while? So 2 to 3 years is great. I want to propose where we're at right now, that we jump to the question you said we were going to table to the end, because it was a good one, but a little bit beefy. And we did talk about kicking these questions into possibly multiple recordings. The question came from Mr. Stoked Brogy, or at least that's a social media handle for Michael. He said, growth has been great. Profit margin is solid. At what point do you feel like your business can just sustain as is, and you just need to maintain, if that's ever a feeling, he puts in parentheses, current KPIs without pushing harder? I'm constantly feeling the need to grow, and it's worked great to get us where we are now, but recently realized that may work can sometimes hit a point of diminishing returns and can take away from family and friend time. I guess it's a long-winded way to ask you, do you ever feel, quote unquote, okay taking a breather, and how do you get there? I love this question because I have played this game both in my head and in conversations with my business partners. I was the last to go. I'm going to have you start with this one, Mark.
Yeah, first of all, I want to acknowledge this is a great question, because I think what you're really asking is, how will you spend your wild and precious life? And it's a philosophical question for which I'm not sure there is a hard answer one way or the other. And I think probably the question is more important than the answer, because I think as a human, you will desire increasing opportunities to challenge yourself. You'll desire the ability to paint and create and make additional complexity and art with your life and your business. Additionally, because of the tyranny of the quantifiable, you also have a highly attractive quantifiable number that you're going to track. And if you're at all an ambitious person, you're going to want to keep increasing that number. And that, of course, is your income. Now, income, of course, is related to revenue. So another point you made that was interesting is it is entirely possible to grow the revenues of your business and see your actual personal take-home income go down over time. And broadly, that's probably not ideal. I think it's not wrong, I guess, if you're really just passionate about having a larger, more complicated business, but I'd be hard pressed to think of a scenario where that really makes sense, unless is what tends to happen, frankly, is in theory, the individual's justifying it as a temporary dip in their margins and their income en route to a never ending growing business. And that's just usually not the way this works out, right? Now, the challenge, I think, with this being a human is you're going to want to grow in some ways. And there are really a handful of ways a typical training gym owner grows, right? Because at a certain point, your training gym will likely hit a natural size, whether because of your physical capacity or your market. It's not really going to be able to grow. You're not going to be able to outsell a certain amount of attrition. At that point, you have a few options. You can open up another facility. You can look to license your model. You can look into franchise your model. You can become a business coach or consultant, or you can pursue completely different wealth generating opportunities like real estate investing. Now, you get to decide which of those make the most sense for you. I think we're probably all situated and have different natural tendencies and talents for any of those paths. But I think the final thing I want to speak on here is I do think it's important to take moments where you take breathers. I think the challenge of the tyranny of the quantifiable is if we're always pushing for more, at a certain point, when you're making sufficient, the first tier is making enough money that you're having a comfortable quality of life. Probably the second tier is when you're making enough money, you have a comfortable quality of life, and your savings are adequate or more than adequate for your long-term retirement goals. Once you get above that, at a certain point, you do start to, I think, see a really diminishing of returns on that additional wealth if it's taking away from your family, your friends, your own health. It is such a cliche and so true that in Western society, so often, particularly in the business space, people are absolutely willing to light their personal relationships and their health on fire for the pursuit of wealth. And then if you do your job really well, you wind up with a lot of money and diseased and alone with a divorce and children who hate you. That's like super harsh. I hope it's not happening for anyone listening. But I do think we do need to consider all these realms of life. And I also think there's seasons. I think there's seasons of grind where you push. And importantly, you need seasons where you can breathe a little bit. And this is just speaking my own experience. So I'll be interested to hear Pete's thoughts on this. But speaking for me, I don't think I have been able to maintain for 10 years the pace that MFF has often asked of me when I'm pushing and I'm grinding and I'm pushing. I've definitely had dedicated periods where I'm like, this is great. I'm making great income. I'm hanging out in Europe a lot. I'm going to Burning Man. I'm taking a lot of time for myself. I'm pursuing other things like Business for Unicorns. And no doubt the business is not going to grow in a spectacular way if I'm not pushing all my life force into it. But for me, I think that was important because there's more to my life than just growing the business. And frankly, when I look back over the past 10 years, after those periods, I felt rested. I felt reinvigorated in my business. And over time, I just became reinterested in pushing the business and really trying to grow the business in an intentional way. And that time I spent wandering like a flaneur through Berlin or through Florence. And so much of my personal joy has been through travel, having done a lot of that recently. Oftentimes it's in that travel, in that time away from the business, that I get ideas and I'm re-inspired and I get to return to the business renewed with energy, with love, with appreciation for what it is that we're doing. Because I think that's a real danger, frankly. And it sounds like this gentleman is maybe not in a position in a very wonderful way, but I think that's the challenge too. Unless you get your training gym, micro gym to a certain point where that's even possible, I don't know how sustainable this is. It's truly a cliche, but you have a terrible job at that point, right? You have a job where you have all the stress, you're making less money, you're making as an employee, and you're grinding 24/7. I don't see that as sustainable mentally, physically, spiritually. And the challenge is a lot of training gym owners, I know you feel like you're just on the precipice, like you're almost there. And believe me, this isn't a pitch necessarily for working with me and Pete, but I think oftentimes the thing that's required at that point is help, right? Because there are solutions. Other people have figured this out. And I am not a sociopath, so I can't give you any guarantees because I don't know. I don't know you. I don't know your market. Maybe you are just in a terrible location. But more often than not, if you haven't turned over all the stones, if you're somebody listening, you're like, oh, I am grinding. Oh, I can't have breaks. Then you might want to invest in help, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be us, but if there's people out there that have playbooks, they have solutions, and you can come to them with specific challenges, they can help you solve them faster. That oftentimes, counterintuitively, that investment is the thing that actually makes your business sustainable for you, because then you can push through those plateaus and get to the place where both your margins and importantly, your take-home income for yourself and your family feels like proper compensation for the blood, sweat, tears, stress, etc. I think I'm going to pull up there. Pete, what do you think?
I like that you use the term seasons, because that was what was kicking around my head when I read that. There are seasons to life. There are seasons of your business achieving maturity. We did double-digit growth year over year for the first 7 years we were in business. And then I don't want to use the term flatline, but we plateaued from 2014 till around 2018 from Massachusetts. Well, what happened during that window of time? Well, I, for one, actually both Eric and I started accumulating children, and we to a degree, I would say, intentionally plateaued, because in my experience, my life, my head, I can only be all in on one, maybe two things at a time, where I'm going to be just ravenous about consuming information that's going to make me better at that thing, throwing myself into it. And there was a moment where I said, I'm entering a new season in my life. It's time to be dad. I got to throw myself into it. And you can read as many books as you want about parenting or creating sleep habits for your kids or things like that. But Mike Tyson was right when he said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. You just repeatedly get punched in the face as an entrepreneur, as a parent. And at that stage, I was developing the systems for being a family man that would allow me to eventually return to a new season of growth in our operation. And so that was a couple years of figuring out how to be a good dad and husband with, kids in the house, being in the family. That happened once we had our second kid in 2016. Well, we were ready to kind of sprint there because the systems were in place. So about a year after my son Owen was born, we were a family of four. We're kind of like, this is it. We feel good. Systems were running themselves. We're ready to do this. Let's dive in. Let's throw ourselves back into business development. And 2019, best year ever. 2020, believe it or not, less than 1% short of that 2019 number, even during COVID. 2021 is going to obliterate all of those numbers. But it's because I've been able to focus semi-singularly on chasing growth because I got that last season squared away. Doesn't mean I'm not being a good dad. It just means that I had to figure out how to systemize that the same way I have to systemize my business. And I was totally okay with it. I guess I'd say I'm forgiving of years of plateau, but I'm not forgiving of complacency. So plateau without something else that I'm, applying my energy toward, not so okay. But plateau while raising what I believe to be exceptional little human beings, awesome. So here we are. I do often come back when I hear the question about work-life balance, which that's pretty much what this is. I like Alan Cosgrove's analogy where he says work-life balance is just a swinging pendulum. It's moving in each direction, aka it's seasonal. I have come out of a pendulum swinging toward family. I'm in the midst of a business development and business chasing stage in my life. I'm admittedly starting to feel a little in the weeds between multiple LLCs and coaching at Business for Unicorns and figuring out what, if anything, I want to do with my own personal brand, things like that. But I know that it's just a stage, and I'm going to figure out what's meaningful and important to me, and then I'm going to double down on that, just like I have over the years. And I'm not going to beat myself up about it too much. So I guess my short answer is you need to tell yourself this is the threshold at which I'm ready to idle a little bit. It doesn't mean quit on your business. It means there is such a thing as enough for a period. Just don't get complacent.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great point, Pete, because I think the final point I'll make here is it is possible to remain hungry to grow as a human professionally, and it's not necessarily always related to the finances, and it's the tiering of the quantifiable, right? Now, having said that, I think part of it, to answer the question very specifically, how do you know it's okay? I think part of that question, there is a values answer and there's a finance answer, right? Are you making enough money that you can do it for what your cost of living is, for your particular goals, for your particular financial standards? Because the final point I will make here is I love this question around sometimes you hit a point of diminishing returns, right? And that can be diminishing returns from a values perspective, as far as now the extra money you're making is not worth what you're losing as far as your relationships with family and friends, your ability to experience life, to experience worlds, to rest, to take care of your physical body. And there's also diminishing returns financially, where the revenues are going up, but maybe margins are going down, or even more insidious, maybe margins look okay, but you're starting to burn more cash and you're making less money. So maybe we can speak to this on the next podcast. I've been reading a book recently. It's been really illuminating. The Ultimate Blueprint for Insanely Successful Business, kind of a cheesy name, but it's by Keith Cunningham. Everybody's reading his book, The Road Less Traveled, which I think is decent. I'm not in love with the way many people are, but I think it's great stuff in it. I actually think this book is a lot better because I'm learning a lot, I think, of really painful lessons to understand, even in a service business, the way I need to do a better job of marrying my understanding of my cash flow statements and my balance sheet against my P&L. Because again, even if the business is getting a lot more revenue, if those margins are going down, and importantly, you're making less and less money on average every month, that is a problem. So one thing I would encourage you to do as a training gym owner, probably everybody listening, is if you're not already doing this, this sounds ridiculous, but I would recommend track how much money is going in your bank account, because your tax returns are not always going to bear a lot of relation to that. Because if you have a good accountant, the way they're going to move deductions, you're not necessarily going to be able to know, looking at your previous tax returns or even P&L, how actually financially lucrative that was for you as the entrepreneur. And I think that's probably a number you want to keep an eye on, because that's the number at the end of the day, frankly, that matters. It doesn't really matter what the P&L says. It doesn't matter what the tax return says. If the business is solvent and you are making enough income or you're seeing increases there, that's great. And if you're seeing a massive drop in the actual money going in your bank account month over month, that is a consideration as well. And that's something I really only started doing, I think, in 2017. But it's interesting because I meticulously track every month my income from the various business streams, the various ways I'm paid out from salary and bonuses. And yeah, that's the number that I'm most interested in. It's not just about the money for me, but to the extent it is about the money, that's the one I care about. The revenue to me is not actually a relevant number.
Yeah. Stop chasing vanity metrics. I like it.
All right, friends.
All right. I think we have successfully banged out half of our questions.
Great.
So we know we got another one in the can here, but I like this format. It's fun to bounce to different concepts.
Yes, indeed. All right, friends. Well, thanks so much for listening. As always, the Business for Unicorns podcast. As always, please subscribe. Please refer us to your friends. Please do all the things, and we will catch you soon.
Hey friends, before you go, just one more thing. If you enjoy this podcast, you get value out of it, you enjoy listening, please share this podcast, comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Please share it with friends and family. We don't spend any money on marketing or advertising. And so the only way people find out about this podcast is from you. So please do everything you can to share it with friends and fellow colleagues in the fitness industry. We love making it and we want to keep doing it for a long, long time. So I appreciate your support. Go have a kick-ass day. Bye.